Welcome to the How I Became podcast, all about entrepreneurship. Alan, welcome to the How I Became podcast. I am beyond honored that you are joining us today. I have a whole host of questions that I'm excited to walk through with you and get your perspective on and hear your journey um, over the years growing Wattpad, selling
hmm
Wattpad, and starting your new venture with your wife.
hmm
But where I'm interested to start, and this is just a line that I read on your LinkedIn profile that you are a recovering CEO. So I wanted to start there and understand what does that mean and how did you come up with that phrasing?
Yeah, I guess the word recovering, perhaps there's a tiny bit of negative connotation in there, and uh, in a way it's not wrong, but also in a way it's not right. It doesn't
Yeah.
really tell the whole story because I guess I, I I believe many CEOs would agree, whether you are CEO of a two-person company with just your co-founder or multiple co-founders or 1,000-person company, all CEO would agree with one thing. It's a super, super stressful job. It's perhaps you can delegate a lot at scale, especially, but the decisions that you have to make, perhaps just one decision every month, could be uh, a decision that completely changed the trajectory of the company,
Right.
and that type of decisions are super super stressful, and that's why it's like having a good exercise, going to the gym. You need to recover. Doesn't mean exercising is bad. Sometimes it's actually freshen you up, but you just need some time to recover.
Yeah, that makes sense. It is probably one of the toughest jobs out there. So now, post CEO life, how are you enjoying it and what are you focused on day to day
hmm
now?
Yeah. So, well, I guess I'm forever recovering.
Yeah.
I don't mean to say this in a negative way. It's just that uh, the next thing after on my LinkedIn profile after recovering CEO is three-time entrepreneur. So for me, I I just don't have it in me to start the fourth one. The reason is nothing I don't like it, nothing I didn't love my job. In fact, it's exactly opposite. But the fourth time sounds a little bit repetitive. I'm not sure um, it's motivating enough for me to do the same thing over and over again.
Right.
In a way, it's almost like you've been to the Stanley Cup final a few times, and perhaps I still want to go there, but perhaps in a different role. It's the
Yeah.
same game, and that's why, as a venture capitalist now, is in a way, it's still giving me all the same adrenaline, and at the same time, I feel like I'm growing, I'm learning, I'm doing something new. It's a new challenge, and I think that's a net plus to me.
Yeah. So I guess with starting two small fish, you're able to kind of stay in that entrepreneurial world in a different way and helping other people achieve
Mm,
that Stanley Cup or, achieving that end goal. But and we'll get into Two Small Fish. I'm curious though, when in your journey, maybe it was, coming to Canada or your family or other influences, but what made you realize that you wanted to be an entrepreneur or that that was a path that excited you?
Yeah, perhaps give the audience a little bit more background.
Please.
My family moved here when after I finished high school. I was 18 and 11 months at that time, and technically an adult, legally an adult, but practically still a kid.
Right.
At that time, I got enrolled into electrical engineering at U of T, and then I got my master there. And I guess many immigrant families would go through the same thing. The first generation they try so hard to bring the next generation to a new country we have to make it work. And the one thing very common is, well, find a stable job, find a good job that
Right.
high pay. That's I would say most immigrant families would hear the same thing. I don't need to convince anyone here. In a way, I'm not saying I just listen to my parents. I do want to make my own decision, but definitely parents made a huge influence on me. So my first job was at IBM, and I believe after the first day, I know this is not me. I know large corporation is not me.
Wow.
So I think 9 months later, I joined tiny startup company at that time called Delrina. And keep a long story short, when I joined, it was uh, maybe 50, 60 people, something like that, and maybe closer to 100. I actually don't know the actual number, but definitely under 100. And well, one of the reasons I joined was my girlfriend, then girlfriend, now wife. We met in school, and Eva got her first job at the arena, and I saw her such a big contrast between IBM, a big corporation, and a tiny company. When she joined, it was like 20 people. And so 9 months later, I joined, and it was one of the luckiest and best decisions in my life because I have the chance to work for some amazing entrepreneurs and saw the company grew from like 20 people when Eva joined. I joined 9 months later to like 4 years later, it became an eight-person company and just sold for $500 million. And that was in the 90s, right? That was a big
Wow.
deal uh, when you have a chance to see a small company in literally over a thousand, just over 1,000 days, grew to become one of the top 10 PC software companies in the world. Life changing.
That
That's all I have to
is,
say.
and the amount that you learn and how a company goes from so small to successfully becoming so big must have been just jaw dropping. Were you knowing that you had from, as you mentioned, from like immigrating to Canada and there was pressure to be successful, and I think a lot of families feel that. Were you nervous to take a leap from, a big corporate and successful company like IBM and moving to something perhaps more risky because it was so small? Not obviously you couldn't tell the future.
Mhm.
You didn't know that it was going to be successful. So did you have a high risk tolerance?
Um, I I don't think at that time, I don't think I had a high risk tolerance. And in fact, my parents' first reaction at that time was, well, IBM is a very reputable big
Right.
company. All those things that you imagine it, especially in Asian parents would say at that time, right? But I guess I wasn't able to articulate this really well, but I did not feel that risky at the time. I guess when now, as a reflection, when I look back, I can very succinctly summarize how I feel. A startup might be risky, but the startup ecosystem is not.
Hmm.
So if it doesn't work out, it's all right because you just jump to another startup and start over again. Yeah, it's if you stay in that ecosystem, I don't think in the past perhaps half a century this ecosystem at any given point in time disappear for even a millisecond.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess whether if you're working at the company, whether it fails or succeeds, you're going to learn a lot, and all of those learnings you can
Hmm.
apply to whatever the next startup that you end up at is. Which take me maybe to the next part of your journey there. So you were part of this company that rapidly grew and exited. Then what for you and for Eva at that point?
Hmm. Yeah, so I think after not even a year, all the founders left. It is it's almost like the Raptors after winning the championship. They went off to different teams, and that's only natural. I think after a year or two, Eva left and joined ATI, now AMD. It was ATI, for those who might not remember. It was actually one of the largest, maybe the second largest or third largest tech acquisitions in Canada. It was the world's number one graphics chip company. Uh, Second was NVIDIA, and ABM, not ABM, AMD bought them maybe in 2006 or something. And for me, I took the very unusual path when everyone left and went on to start their own company or join another company. I actually stayed on for another 4 years. Symantec acquired Darina at that time. So I worked there for 4 years, and I would say it was kind of unusual, but it was one of the best decisions as well because I didn't have to switch the job. It wasn't a new environment. Of course, over time it evolved into more like Symantec and get assimilated. It's a new environment, but it's not an abrupt change, first of all. And secondly, Symantec was a far larger company than Darina, even at that time. I think they were number three in the world in PC software at that time. And I learned how to lead, how to manage a large team, uh, manage, not manage, interact with various stakeholders. That's the skill that you possess only when you work for a scale up or a large scale company. So in a way, it's very, very complementary to the skill that I acquired early on from the amazing entrepreneurs. And perhaps unintentionally, I didn't know I would need that skill when I ran Wattpad when it was at scale. So yeah, when Wattpad was close to the acquisition, the organization was a few hundred people, and
Yeah.
how would I know the skill to manage such a large team? And I actually recycle a lot of that when I learned from Symantec.
You never think that a skill you're gonna learn at a company that grows to that scale is going to help you at the end of your
Mm-mm,
entrepreneurial journey or at the end of, your startup experience when you are managing a large team because in the beginning you're starting with, a handful of people, if that. So
mm-mm,
you're like, oh, I didn't need those huge, big team leadership skills, but I think it's amazing that you were able to pull that thread throughout the entire experience from building. But
yep.
that was one of the things that I was curious about is growing as a leader from, employee 1 to employee 100 and how you whether it was at Wattpad or previously, but what are some of those learnings that you took because, a leader at a team of 1 to a leader at
Mm-hmm,
a team of, multi levels is very different.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess as a reflection, I would say the early startup founders, the skill that they need to uh, perform, is very, very different than a leader or a CEO at a few hundred, a few thousand people. Completely different skill. At the same time, one thing that few people talk about, and I think that skill is actually um, extremely valuable but rare, is scaling, going from 0 to 1 and to 10 to 100 is also a very completely different skill. There are a lot of people, they lifetime career is in a large corporation. They can run a big corporation like the back of their hand. But going from a smaller organization to a bigger organization, I think that's required also a completely different skill. And I think that's one thing that I truly, truly appreciate, and especially when I look back, and I think very few people have that skill, to be honest.
Are there some elements of the skill that stand out to you from 0 to 1 to 100 that you would be able to point out the difference in those leaders across the scale?
Yeah. Let's say perhaps I'm oversimplifying, but from 0 to 10, uh,
Mhm.
the founders or everyone in the company would need to wear multiple hats. As an example, I believe our uh, uh, Ivan and I co-founded the company, and then Eva joined us shortly after, and then need to expand. We start to hire people. Our first hire was uh, a colleague that we used to work at another company. So the whole team know each other for quite some time. But anyway, I digress. The first hire, as a perfect example, in the morning, he would be writing the iOS code. Perhaps by noontime, he would switch to Android, and the afternoon, he would switch to the backend in a single day. So that's a good example of wearing multiple hats. And I can name 10 other things that we had to do on a single day. But when the company grew to, say, 20, 30 people or 40 people, um, many still wear multiple hats, but many start to be very specialized. You do iOS and iOS only. You do perhaps the first marketing hire is from social media to to graphics and everything in between. And at some point, we would have someone perhaps just specialize on social media and nothing else. Um, that's a big switch because, well, obviously the scale is very, very different. But as you continue to scale, you need to hire managers. You have to hire leaders to lead the managers. Well, you need to add another level in the company. That's also another skill that you might excel at and as an IC, individual contributor, but you might not be good at managing. You might be good at managing, but you might not be good at leading other managers and other ICs. So that transition, in a way, is fascinating. That transition is uh, a lot of people could not make it. Um, I don't want to sound negative, uh, but it's true. So I guess in a nutshell, for people who went from 0 to 100, I would summarize it as be unrecognizable every year too, because the skill that you need to do a good job changes so rapidly. Not saying you just be unrecognizable, you'll be doing a good job. But if you are not unrecognizable, you probably are not doing your job in a fast growing company.
Alan, I love hearing you say that. It has been mentioned by 3 different folks on this podcast about firing and rehiring yourself 6 months later, and that you should continue to evolve because if you recognize yourself, you're stagnant. So you need to
Mhm,
continue to change. And I've never thought of it that way. Obviously, you're reading books or you're trying to try a new technique, but to actually think of it as making yourself unrecognizable so you can continue to push the business forward is such a great
mhm,
um like brain structure, like a way to think about it.
mhm.
I'm
Yeah,
curious.
maybe I'll double click on this one
Yes, please.
uh, for another 1 minute perhaps. One thing that I did it was I guess let me start off with the problem. I recognized, oh, perhaps 2 months ago is everything is hunky dory, everything was working, and then I realized, things are broken now. What happened? It's not like the process or whatever you do automatically got broken. It's just the fact of scaling. So one thing I did, and I'm using this as an example. There are other things that I did as well. Is every year I look at my calendar and see how I spend my time, and every year I have to make some adjustments because what worked 12 months ago might not work anymore. So there are tasks that I have to give up, delegate. Now perhaps the team I hire that function, I hire that person I could delegate to, and that's super helpful.
Were there elements of the job, knowing you were technical, that you missed as you started to scale because you're no longer maybe I'm wrong, maybe you stayed
Mhm.
very much in the back end, but as you became a bigger leader, did you miss part of the early stage elements?
Uh, yes, but perhaps just initially, and let me explain. Um, the When we first started, it was only Ivan and me, and I have to say Ivan is probably the best engineer, best technologist I've ever worked with. Everything he does is 10x the speed of anybody else I've ever seen,
It's a good
including
partner to
myself.
have.
Yes, yes, yes. So initially, I would say I resisted the temptation. I almost couldn't resist the temptation to write code. I love doing that, and I, even though before I started Wattpad, I already start leading a large team or larger teams, right?
Right.
So um, there was at one point there was a piece of code that he didn't have time to do it. It's a standalone piece of code that kind of throw away, and I couldn't resist the temptation of doing that. And I quickly realized, well, why? Why should I be doing this after I've done that? And then it was also a very good decision. I told myself, let me stop writing code professionally because I have someone who can do it faster in this case. But most importantly, even if Ivan is slower than me, which is not possible, but let's assume that, um, I have other more important, well, I shouldn't say more important. In my role, more important job to do. Writing code is important, but my role is different. It's like a hockey team. Don't play defenseman when you are forward. If you're a
Right.
goalie, don't jump to the other side and start shooting, right? You have your job to do. So that was an aha moment, and I think I can count so many examples along the way that I love doing this. I started doing this, and love doing this 2 years ago, but I have to give it up because my role has changed.
Right. I imagine it's hard, but then you learn to love the new elements and the new challenges that
Hmm.
you're facing as you grow.
Yeah.
But you've mentioned a little bit of the start of the business, and I wanted to talk about building the business. Um, I was reading a bit that in the early days, you were pitching to Eva about the idea of reading a book on your phone, and perhaps she didn't buy into the concept in the early days, but she saw that you were super passionate about it and that you were
Hmm.
going to jump into this. So, what was that experience like coming to this idea, starting to build the business, bringing all the pieces together for something that you truly believed in?
Yeah, well, perhaps give the audience a little bit more context.
Please.
I had this idea more than 20 years ago when I was the CTO of my first company, Tira. It was a mobile gaming company, but I love to read, so I did that prototype. But it didn't, of course, the phone size, the phone capability was so primitive at that time.
Yeah.
So fast forward to 2006, I was a year before the iPhone came out. At that time, the most popular phone was the flip phone,
Yeah.
the Motorola Razr
The
for those
razor,
old enough who remember that.
my favorite
Uh,
phone.
yeah, so that on that phone, you can actually read relatively comfortably, right? That's the in a way the genesis of Wattpad. I started the resurrected the prototype, and then Ivan uh, even though we were friends for many years, I didn't realize in his basement he was building the same thing. And once we discovered that,
Wow.
let's work together. And once we decided, I secretly flew to Vancouver to see him. We moved to Vancouver for like few years. I was supposed to go to San Francisco, change the flight, and connect through Vancouver, and met at the airport. And then, well, let's start the company. That kind of conversation. So when I went back home, I told Eva, right? Hey, I talked to Ivan about this idea. Have been working on this for many years, and he's working on this as well. I could just see how she rolled her eyes. I wish I recorded that on a video. That was the most amazing, hilarious, but also depressing moment. Um, anyway, she was very supportive, even though she told me this is the most stupid idea I've ever seen. And she wasn't wrong because I would say, uh, despite the flip phone was much better, there's one thing better than the flip phone, the iPhone. So when the iPhone came out, that was game changing. But initially, because it was still the infrastructure was still very primitive, not just the phone itself, but um, there was no Wi-Fi wasn't as ubiquitous, uh, perhaps starting to become ubiquitous, but mobile data uh, from the carriers, it it was non-existent. You can buy a plan, but uh, it's like $10 per megabyte or something. It's like
Right.
ridiculously expensive. So no one had it. So all those building blocks, they were not in place at that time, and that's one of the reasons why the initial perhaps 2 3 years it was tough. It was difficult. We just couldn't get any traction.
Did you knowing that these were gonna be roadblocks in the success of Wattpad not being able to have internet all the time, not everyone not having an iPhone the day it came out like that, um, was your mindset, "Well, eventually technology will catch up, that this will this makes sense?" Or was it that you would create Wattpad in a way to live in a world where not everyone had an iPad and Wi-Fi wasn't everywhere? Like,
Mhm.
how did you think about that?
Yeah, I guess to well, use even though I don't play hockey, I use a lot of hockey analogy, as you can tell. Uh, what does Wayne Gretzky said? Don't go where the puck is, go where the puck will be, right? That's his famous quote. And I think we in a way we all of us, all three of us, Eva, Ivan. Uh, had the ability to kind of see the future in a way. We partially it helped because we all three of us also work at Hero Wireless.
Right.
It was the mobile gaming company that I mentioned that I co-founded, and we kind of in the few years leading up to starting Wattpad, we saw how uh, uh, what the trajectory was in terms of improvement in screen size, in phone
Right.
capability, in terms of connection. We can extrapolate. We deep down we know we might be a little bit too early, but well, you rather be too early than too late. Once the window of opportunity has closed,
Yeah.
it's done. You have to move to the next idea.
Totally. And with the idea of Wattpad, um, being like kind of a two-sided writers and the
Hmm.
readers get people to start writing, start using it, and then once it's caught up, you kind of
Hmm.
already have your first movers, your early movers, and it can snowball from there, I'm sure.
Yeah, I guess at that time we weren't able to articulate this as well. Remember, it was 2006, almost 20 years ago now, and YouTube was 1 year old. Facebook was 100% company, right? So I think
Different.
the for many founders, this is a very important point. Um, at that point in time, we saw the platform shift. We saw what I mean by that is the world um, started to shift from the static Web 1.0 to mobile, social, cloud computing, the confluence of all three uh, at the same time. And if you catch that wave early, if you have a unique product that fully natively capture that opportunity, that's the best time to, in a way, to start a company. And that's only happened once in a decade or so.
And you have to have the perseverance throughout that to stick it out and hope to see the other side of it when, things are changing and, you saw the 3 of you saw a future, but I'm sure, there's 3 other founders at the time that saw a different future and went a different way, and there's a bit of luck that plays into it. I'm curious, and I know you've shared that there were times that you had doubts and you thought about pulling the plug on Wattpad in the beginning, but what like, what was driving you to persevere and push through? Or perhaps what are some of the defining moments in those early days that helped you grow it to what it is now?
Yeah, so about after a year, we started. We hope at that time to reach like 1 million users. It's kind of modest because YouTube, again, YouTube was 1 year old at that time, and we saw they went from zero to maybe 10 million in a year. So 1 million was kind of modest. But I think we reached that goal, except that we missed by 3 zeros. Depressingly, after the first year, as a free product, you only have 1,000 users, and if you run a B2B SaaS company, like after 1 year, you have 1,000 customers. Celebrate, right? But for a free consumer product, 1,000 users, you suck. So we were really struggling. We Ivan and I went out for a coffee at that time, and we already start experimenting with different revenue like advertising. We have some banner ads on our website,
Yeah.
and I got a check. I wish I kept that check. It's a $2 check from Google. We were using Google Display, and it was ridiculously depressing. And we went out for coffee, and this is what I said, Ivan. I cashed that check.
Did you
But
cash it?
yeah, we cashed it. I was kicking myself. I shouldn't. Uh, I should have framed it. But anyway,
Yeah.
that turned into 1 cup of Tim Horton, and I told Ivan, "Well, let's get an empty cup and spare this cup of coffee." Kind of send a message like, we are really struggling. We have to figure out what to do. So in that conversation, we talk about, yeah, it's not working. Let's pull the plug. But at the end, both of us realize, well, we don't really have to pull the plug. We perhaps we can hustle. We can find some side hustles, to keep us going, um, and keep Wattpad alive. Keep a long story short, we even started another company. We did consulting on the side. We did a million different things on the side, and keep us going. And what we discovered in hindsight, we had the right Wattpad had it's the right idea. Mobile media consumption definitely took off, right? User-generated content or community or social network, they all took off. But one thing we did not have as much appreciation at the time is it takes time for the snowball to roll down the hill. Initially, just have to push, and you push hard, and it still doesn't roll. But once the snowball start rolling, it's unstoppable. But it took us almost 3 years to reach that. Uh, I wouldn't even say escape velocity, but close to the point that we can visualize at some point we could achieve escape velocity.
Those 3 years must have been nerve-wracking throughout the process, and,
Painful.
I can't even imagine. I wish you framed that check as well, but I'm curious about as it you have the snowball started rolling and it started to work. What was the monetization models, and was that, um, a key component to you in building Wattpad is figuring out how to monetize it, or was that more of an afterthought? Like, where did that play into building this, and what did it look
Mhm.
like? in the early stages
Yeah.
or throughout?
Well, we were bootstrapping for like 5 years almost. Well, we raised a very small angel round in between, but it took 5 years before we raised proper round of funding, and that
Yeah.
round was like led by Union Square Ventures in New York. They were the first investor in Twitter, Cloud, and Coinbase, and Zynga, and many iconic companies. So anyway, what I wanted to say was when we were bootstrapping, we didn't have a choice, but put better ads. That's an easy monetization model. It's not, we don't
Right.
have to invent this for social media companies. That's kind of obvious. But when we got the term sheet from uh, Albert Wenger from Union Square Ventures, he, in the email, not in the term sheet itself, he said, now, Alan, would you mind we add a clause in there for us to fund you guys? You have to get rid of all the S. And when I read that, must be a typo, right? So I call him up and Albert, I want to make sure I read this right. You asked us, we spent so hard in the past 5 years to get to ramen profitability.
Yeah.
And you asked us to go back to zero. I just want to make sure I understand. And he said, yes, yeah, your user experience right now is so poor because you have so many ads. It it would slow you down in terms of user growth. And at this stage of your company, you should focus on growing the user base. And um, at the end, we didn't pull all the ads, but I, I'm I I
Scaled
I
back.
told Albert, I hear you. I cringe when I look at my own website. We have too many ads because we have to eat. Okay, so we found the compromise, and it was a very very good solution because it allowed us to continue to iterate on the advertising business. Uh, but we make sure the homepage there's no ban ads when you're reading. There's no like interruption. We in a way achieve both objectives, learn the advertising business and keep the user experience very, very good. And that's our first business model. But I think until almost like year 7 of the company, we didn't really spend much time to think about monetization. And then eventually we introduced subscription, pay content, and using AI to find the best content on our platform and turn them into TV shows and movies. Well, perhaps you can see the movie posters behind me. It's not like of course, I love those movies, but those are one of the many ways that we monetize.
Um, that's such a fascinating transition from the community element of write writers and readers and pulling that into, like a Hollywood-esque, and getting these community writers to become so much bigger and so much more. And I know I briefly told you before we started
Hmm.
chatting that my brother had wrote on Strange Yarns, and I think it gave, sorry, on Wattpad a book called Strange Yarns,
Hmm.
and it I think also builds a confidence perhaps for writers to kind of build an audience and see what works and what
Hmm.
doesn't. Um, I believe you introduced a bit of that AI element to the business. So before ChatGPT was all the rage. So what was the thought process behind that, and what was some of the considerations in introducing AI in the back end of Wattpad?
Yeah, it was year 2012. After we raised Series B, we were still very small. We had like 25 people in the company, but we were swarmed by one thing, data. Um, I can't remember the numbers, probably 10x smaller than when we exit. But around 10 million users, but they are highly, highly engaging. They post millions of comments every month. So we couldn't uh, we couldn't just manually look at the data and figure out the trends. So we hired our first data scientist, our founding data scientist, Brandon. That was the best decisions. One of the best decisions throughout the journey. We made a lot of very good decisions, I have to say, but it was one of the best. Yes, hiring him uh, helped us learn about something called machine learning and artificial intelligence. It was 2012. Remember, there
No one was thinking about
no
it.
one
No,
knows the AI godfathers. Artificial intelligence was only in science fiction, but I think we probably were the first um, companies that actually deploy this. I wouldn't claim we are the first, but definitely the
early.
first batch of the companies that start to use AI to mine the data and also predictively find the best content uh, on our website, on our platform. Um, at one point, as an example, a very, very, not very popular story, uh, we predicted that based on analysis, based on the AI is telling us, it would become the number one on our platform in a year. And it actually happened. That was the aha moment after the aha moment that this thing actually worked. I think it was maybe 2014 then we start to see the fruits out of this.
What one that is spectacular and clearly made you feel like, wow, we just made an incredible decision. What did you then do with some of that information? If thinking back, what were those key learnings that the insights provided you that made some maybe pivotal moments for the
Mhm.
business?
Yeah, another pivotal moment of the business is expanding from a reading and writing platform to full-blown entertainment platform that
Mhm.
includes movies and TV shows. Um, it also happened around that time when Brandon joined us. I think around 2013, perhaps maybe a year later, we start to uh, partially because of looking at the data that there was an aha moment. Wait a minute, this is we not just the reading and writing engagement. We are sitting on a gold mine of content or creative IP, uh,
Yeah.
creative intellectual properties. And once we made that, not switch, but once we had that aha moment, then we realized, well, um, perhaps we should even change, not well, change too strong a word, refine our vision and mission so that it's not just reading and writing. If you look back maybe 10 years ago, 12 years ago now, around 2012, um, the company mission was like we want to be the billion person using the platform to read and write, something along this line. And then we switched to entertain and connect the world through stories. Very simple. In 2013 or 2014, that was the precursor to the Wattpad Studios that we launched in 2016. But there were years leading off to that, and I would give data and AI a lot of credit. Not the only thing we did at that time to
Of
help us
course.
find that aha moment, but definitely one of the key reasons.
Hearing you tell the story and just thinking about where you started and the journey to where you ended up, I'm sure when you reflect on it, you're just in awe of like this whole experience. And I want to hear a little bit more about the transition to Two Small Fish and how you and Ava have started your fund and what that looked like. And I know it's focused in Canada, so maybe a little bit of why that's the focus of the businesses you're
Mhm,
invested in and
mhm.
a little bit about Two Small Fish.
Yeah, so Two Small Fish is almost 10 years old now. Uh, Eva left after we raised Series B around 2013, exactly 10 years ago. She
Okay.
left, took a year off. She doesn't, like me, she doesn't want to work in a large corporation. So
Yeah.
she's, and I think she was quite burned out at that time. So she took a year off, and then um, Wattpad started to take off. We built a very uh, perhaps prominent brand, especially within Canada in the tech ecosystem, but of course globally as well. Our users are over the world. So
Mhm.
anyway, she got a lot of like inbound. Hey, Eva, now that you are not working at Wattpad, do you have time? I just want to perhaps learn from your experience how we could scale, how we could start, that kind of thing. And then really quickly, she turned herself into an angel investor. Um, and then two friends came along. Hey, well, why don't we set up a fund and let's do this together? And that's Two Small Fish Ventures Fund One started in 2015. Um, and before we knew, in the following 4 years, uh, we invested in roughly 20 companies. I'm a co-founder of Two Small Fish Ventures. My
Yeah.
co-founder by name because I ran my own company, Wattpad at that time, right? So uh, the investment conversation only happened around the dining table in the evening. And if a founder needs some help, I'll hop on a quick call
Yeah.
uh, for maybe half an hour, but my involvement was minimal.
Minimal.
Yeah. So during that period, we invested. We wrote the first check to Skip the Dishes. We wrote the first check to uh, Benchside, which now a 500-person company, AI company in the pharmaceutical space. We also, after they graduated from Founderville, we were the only one who wrote them the first check. And then Ada, um, also, I think they're close to 1,000 person company now. We wrote the first check after the product, the first product failed. They pivoted to, uh, it was a completely different idea. And Mike Richardson had that chatbot for support idea at that time. And we were friends already. He actually hung out at the Wattpad office one or 2 days per week for a few weeks to build the prototype because we had the most support takers perhaps in the entire Canada. So, he leveraged
The
that to
good
build the
test.
first prototype. Yeah, so it went really well. And then, keep a long story short, 2019, Eva raised Fund 2, and now we are onto Fund 3, much bigger fund. Um, most of our portfolio companies are in Canada, but I also believe that if someone is building the next Google outside of Canada and that team gave you a call, ping you, you should
You're not
listen.
turning them
So
down.
no, no, no. So we are based here. Our network is strongest in Canada, but we also have very strong network in Silicon Valley, in the US, and around the world. So yeah, we are a global investment VC, but based in Canada.
You clearly have had some heavy hitters and some wins with Two Small Fish Ventures. Is there a framework you use when choosing which companies to invest in, or is there a gut feeling with the founding team? How do
Mhm.
you make some of that assessment?
Yeah, of course. I guess perhaps in one sentence, I can summarize what we
Okay.
invest in. We invest in the next frontier of computing and its applications. Uh,
Okay.
Very simple to explain. When you take a deeper dive, we have a lot of AI companies in the portfolio. We have a few companies that are protocols, like blockchain protocols. I would say blockchain and AI, they are starting to converge. Uh, I have a long thesis. We have a long thesis about that. I'll spare you all the detail. And then the third area of focus is sustainable computing. So as I mentioned earlier, Eva worked for ATI, now AMD. She has semiconductor experience. I'm an electrical engineer by design. I know semiconductor or hardware really well. And Brandon now also joined us as a partner of the firm. He has a small stint at NVIDIA as well. So uh, we cover a lot of bases, but it's the next frontier of computing and its applications. I guess that's the easiest way to describe.
It's interesting to hear throughout, all the hard work and decisions that you've had to make and some of the frameworks you shared. There's still these elements of the stars
Hmm.
aligning to make,
Hmm.
the story come true and come to where you are now, which is really, really fascinating. I know we're almost at the end of our
Hmm.
conversation, and I always end with two questions. So one is throughout the entrepreneurial journey, and when I work with startups or founders, I find that there's a lot of myths that they're told throughout
Hmm.
their journey. And I'm curious if there are any myths that you are told or that you hear that you would want to dispel to aspiring entrepreneurs or founders within their journey right now.
I guess in a way, I kind of touch on this from the outside. Wow, you are the CEO. You are a tech founder. It's very glamorous. Perhaps not Hollywood glamorous, but it's glamorous. Perhaps not the best word to describe, but you get the idea. But behind the scene, you're uh, trying to make do. You're struggling. You have five balls in the air, and you juggle. So the struggle is real, and in a way, that's why Two Small Fish is very unique in a way that I actually spend most of my time uh, helping founders to scale from just the founding team to perhaps to all the way to a scale up. Uh, and I think that's not a lot of people can appreciate the challenges, but I've done it three times. Every uh, situation, every challenges that people have experienced. At least at the bare minimum, I can share that experience. So I think this is one thing that's super helpful and the founders in our portfolio appreciate. And that's the biggest myth, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a real one. I think a lot of the time when people are thinking, even like young kids coming out of university, "Oh, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to be rich." And like there's all, it's not as pretty as it looks. It is hard, hard days, very low bottoms. And obviously there's wins and you have to take time to celebrate those, but
Mhm.
it's a grind. It's a
Yeah,
special person has to be cut out of that.
we didn't have time to talk about this, but during the years when we had a $2 check from Google, we as a family we almost ran out of money. We were thinking about why we have to sell our house. We ran out of cash.
Right. It's
Yeah.
um looking back, I'm sure you're just like, how did we go through that? How did we make it through? But you did, and it was obviously all worth it. But I think people forget how difficult it is to run a business, to be your own boss,
Hmm.
to be the person
Yeah.
making all those decisions. Um, so thank you for sharing that. The very last question, as you know, the name of the podcast is How I Became. And the idea is everyone's naming their episode on how they became whatever you are today. So if you were to name your episode, How I Became fill in the blank, what would you name your episode?
I would say perhaps how I became a learning machine. Um, Not going to repeat what I said early on. You have to be unrecognizable every
Yeah.
2 years. Just unrecognizable is not enough. But if you run a fast scaling startup, the end result, the outcome, you just become unrecognizable every 2 years. And behind that is you just need to keep on growing, keep on learning. You pick up new skills and all those things. And I would say learning how to build a sales team, learning how to build a marketing team from absolutely nothing. I was the one behind our Twitter account at one point. So that kind of skill, I I don't think unless you 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 run fast scaling startup is just very hard to find the opportunity to to learn this fast. And I feel like I'm in a very lucky and privileged position that kind of fell on my lap that I have to make it work. I have to force myself to learn, and over time it became a habit. And I think yeah, that's how I became a learning machine.
Incredible title. Alan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I'm so excited to share this episode, and I really appreciate you sharing your story today. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me.
How I Became a BloomX podcast is hosted by Kelly Yafet and does not constitute a recommendation for any organization, product, or service. For more How I Became content, subscribe where you get your podcasts and visit bloomx.io to join us on Discord.